This presentation is to assist in understanding intermediary and also the use of the form Notice of Intermediary relationship. The referenced form is TAR 1409, which is Notice of Intermediary relationship, and so what is an intermediary? An intermediary is a broker, all right, who negotiates interaction between parties when the agents or broker and agents that are sponsored by the brokerage has obtained the consent from both parties to represent them. The intermediary may, with the consent of the parties, appoint separate individual license holders associated with the broker to work and advise the parties to whom they have been appointed. One agent cannot represent both parties. That's a dual agency and is prohibited by TREC law. So think of the intermediary as a referee between the parties. It's a third party who is going to assign individual agents to work with the buyer and the seller. Okay? But before the members of a brokerage can represent both the buyer and the seller, some steps have to have occurred. First, the buyer and seller have been given the information about brokerage services by their respective agent, okay, at the time of the first substantive communication, and also that the seller executes a listing agreement or other written document that authorizes the broker to act as intermediary. Now, if you remember a listing agreement, there's a box that's checked there that says I agree to let intermediary happen, or I don't want intermediary to happen. Now, the same thing will apply on the buyer. So the buyer executes that authorizes the broker to act as an intermediary. Now, that being said, if either one of those agreements don't specify the allowance of intermediary, then you can't do it. Okay, this form does not trump those buyer rep agreements or listing agreements. So be careful when you fill out the listing agreement or the buyer's rep agreement that the intermediary is allowed. All right. What's important here is that both the buyer and seller, represented by the agents, right, they have to execute the agreement regarding the notice of intermediary before the contract is negotiated. This is rarely done by agents, which is a big mistake because failure to do so could result in revocation, suspension, or reprimand, or some kind of administrative penalty. In other words, TREC wants this thing out front early before a contract is put into place. Now, in worst case scenario, an agent can send the notice of intermediary along with an offer and still fulfill the requirements, but TREC would like to see that done even before a contract is negotiated. They want full disclosure that both parties are in the same brokerage, but most likely you'll wind up submitting that along with an offer. Well, here's the form, and basically pretty cut and dry. Seller's name, prospect's name, the name of the brokerage, which would be Keller Williams, North Collin County, or Keller Williams, McKinney, the property address, right, and the date that the form is created. It states here in paragraph B that the broker's firm represents the owner under a listing agreement and also represents the prospect under a buyer rep agreement. Now, getting back to what was mentioned earlier, it states in paragraph C that there is a listing agreement and a buyer rep agreement in place, and both the owner and the prospect have authorized the broker to act as an intermediary, meaning that box has been checked. Paragraph D will be where the intermediary or the agent will put the names of the prospect agent and the name of the seller's agent. One of the things that you'll find is that 99% of the time the box that says will is the one that will be checked. Very rarely will you have will not appoint licensed associates. I'll give you an instance of one that might occur. If you have a listing agreement and you also have a buyer under a buyer's rep agreement. He now wants to see one of the properties that you have listed. Well, all of a sudden now you're in an intermediary situation. So you're caught in a difficult position. You either have to farm that out to another agent for a referral fee or whatever, or you can uh, say that it is an intermediary situation and you will not be able to provide advice or opinions to either party. You can see where that could be a difficulty. It could also, create some tension between your clients, because now you have clients on both sides. So more often than not, 99% of the time, you're going to have broker will appoint licensed associates and have the names of the two agents that are in there. If it is for some reason will not appoint licensed associates, that those fields will be left blank. All right. Paragraph E, the parties affirm their consent to do intermediary. Paragraph F basically states that uh, there's a disclosure as to any relationships that should be known, like the buyers related to the owner or something along that line, some kind of a relationship or a contemplated business relationship. So that's pretty much what the form is all about. Paragraph D goes on to explain a little bit further. So if the broker appoints an associated license holder to represent the seller and another license holder to represent the buyer, those individual agents, of course, have to offer advice or opinions regarding the transaction if they're asked. If the broker does not appoint those license holders, then they cannot offer advice or opinions relevant to the transaction to either party, and obviously must not favor one principal over the other. Appointments provide the agents the opportunity to provide a higher level of service to their clients rather than sitting there not saying a word. So both buyer and seller must sign the form, and once again, this is done upfront and with the offer, not afterwards, or even preferably before the offer.